whatever the actions may be, whatever form, whatever methods, it would complete an attempt to commit genocide. And of course, motives can also be drawn from or deduced from the actions, the consistent pattern of actions that that followed this this intention. So the expression of intention in this party meeting by itself amounts to an encouraging or inciting of genocide in Tibet. And inciting of genocide or abatement of genocide is a crime punishable under Genocide Act. And another one, at a campaign review in November 2020, a secretary of Tibet Autonomous Region, Mr. Yu Ying Ji, claimed that there are some criminal gangs or underworld forces using religion as a pretext to split the motherland. And he called upon the Tibetan Autonomous Region officials to vigorously smash those religious groups. So he called on to attack those religious groups, that is the religion of Tibet, that is the religious institutions, religious group, and the religious people of Tibet. So it is again, the Chinese wanted to destroy the religious group of the Tibetan people. So it's not against the individual, it is against the whole of the group, that is Tibetan or Tibetan religious group. So the statement that the religious groups are the cause of disunity, or is that this statement is a reiteration or a continuation of the state of mind that existed in 1954. In 1954, His Holiness the Dalai Lama met Mao Zedong for the first time, and Mao Zedong whispered in His Holiness' ears and said, "Religion is a poison." Yes, for this communist trinity, religion is a social toxin. So this is the motive, this is the intention, and there is a similarity and the continuity of this motive and intention from 1954 to 2020. Motive may be difficult to prove because it's a state of mind of those perpetrators. Motive is not spelled explicitly in words, but it can be manifested and deduced from various actions and techniques in the form of law enforcement, policy implementations that touches on every aspect of life of the persecuted people, be it political, administrative, culture, religious life, etc. So China wants to wipe Tibet from the face of the earth. So speaking about Tibet, what is Tibet and what constitutes Tibet? Tibet is the highest plateau in the world, called as the roof of the world. It's inhabited by the Tibetan people with a distinct language, culture, tradition, religions, history, and geography apart from China. And it covers an area of 2.5 square kilometer. It has the most strategic position in Central Asia. Compared to the size, Tibet is thinly populated, whereas China was overpopulated. And Tibet consists of today's Tibet Autonomous Region and other two Tibetan provinces called Amdo and Kham, which is now, since 1965, disintegrated and joined with the other Chinese provinces like Gansu, Sichuan, and Yunnan, etc. So that way, the political, administration, and social life of Tibetans are assimilated into the Chinese demography. So let me talk a bit about major events in a chronological manner. Tibet from 1913 to 50 was de facto independent. Of course, there is the concept of suzerainty which was sort of which was a nominal, a namesake. But yes, Tibet exercised its own international personality, has had its own government and foreign relations. It is in fact an independent state. And from 1950, People's Liberation Army of newly formed China marched into Tibet from the eastern Tibet, that's Chamdo, and of course, Tibetan people fought back but lost. So Tibet asked for help from India, British, USA, but at that time, these countries advised for direct negotiation with China. So in 1950, invasion, and then 1951, Tibet appealed to United UNO, but at that time, the status was for those countries. They said that Tibet's status was not clear, and due to lack of political will, and of course. And yes, at that time, there was an attempt for a negotiation, and thus the discussion was postponed or well, delayed, yes. So in 1951, Tibet had to sign a treaty under duress, and it was called as Agreement on Measures for Peaceful Liberation of Tibet, and that legalized or complete the occupation of Tibet by China. So 1951 and 52, Tibet, they didn't want to, the government of Tibet didn't want to ratify the agreement or treaty, but then the additional forces were there was additional troops of army marched into Tibet and occupied central Tibet. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the spiritual and temporal leader of Tibet, he lost the ability to, negotiate. So the only option was to accept the agreement, and then, but Tibetan people were not happy under Chinese rule or to accept the Chinese sovereignty. So from 1952 itself, the resistance started, and throughout 1950s, resistance movement started, and finally it erupted in full-scale national uprising in March of 1959. So the 1959 was a major turning point in the history of Tibet. There was fully intensified use of force, destruction of monastery, bloodshed, indiscriminate killings of populations, Tibetans, and this led to the flight of His Holiness the Dalai Lama into exile. He came into exile in India. So by this direct occupation of Tibet by People's Republic of China, estimated 1.2 million people have died. And today, after 70 years of occupation by China, Tibetan identity and culture is at the verge of extinction, and we complain of cultural genocide today. Of course, Tibet continues to be one of the most politically restricted and repressed territory in the world. And today I talk of culture genocide of Tibet. So culture genocide is attacked beyond the physical. It's not a killing of biological elements of the group. In addition to physical killing, there is an intent to eliminate the wider institution of the people as a group. And this was done by exterminating the group's foundation, or the very foundation of life of that groups, be it language or traditions, religions, or culture, etc. So what is culture? Culture is a way of life of people, their behavior, belief, values, practice, and symbols that has been accepted and shared in common and transmitted from generations to generations. So it is a characteristics and knowledge of a particular group, and it encompasses social behavior, norms, language, religion, social habits, arts, customs, etc. Culture can be encompassed or manifested in a tangible or non-tangible, such as institutions or properties, culture heritage. So these are the tangible ones, and intangibles like religious practice, rituals, traditions, beliefs, historical ideas, knowledge, values, etc. So this attack on these tangible as well as intangible manifestation of culture is known as cultural genocide. And in order to destroy, in order to constitute a cultural genocide or a genocide, it is not against the individual. It is not because you're killing that person, not because of the individual, but because that individual belongs to a particular group, and your main intention is to exterminate that group or exterminate that people, a group of people. So what defines people or group? Peoplehood is defined, I think, by his membership in a particular group with common language, religion, traditions, common belief, and common history, and the sense of belongingness in that group. So we as a Tibetan feel that because we have the same these values, we have the sense of belongingness or sense of a Tibetanhood. So what is genocide? According to Conventions on Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, which was adopted by General Assembly in 1948, human groups against which genocide is recognized as a crime in international law are national, racial, ethnic, and religious. And genocide is defined in Article 2, first by it must consist of an intention, the intention to destroy in whole or part these groups, national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. And secondly, by the actual acts of killing the members of the group, causing serious bodily harm to the group, deliberately inflicting on group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, and then imposing measures to prevent birth within the groups. And that would be like forced sterilization. And next, forcefully transferring a children from one group to another group. So from the genocide's definition, the first one, causing physical bodily harm, and it is I mean, the fourth one, that is forceful transferring of children from one group to another, that constitutes that does not constitute killing of physical or biological. It has the element of cultural genocide, because when you force the children from one group to another group, the child is brought up in a new environment with new traditions, cultures, and values. So that way, the culture, the continuity in transferring of the knowledge and culture from one generation to another, that is there is a gap in that continuity. So that is an element of cultural genocide. And the genocide is punishable under that law. Conspiracy to commit genocide or attempt to commit genocide or complicity in a genocide is punishable. But till date, the acts of genocide in Tibet was never punished. Of course, there was a trade embargo, sanctions, and condemnations for the violations, but there was no individual indictment or punishment so far. And International Commission of Juries recognized that there was an act of genocide in Tibet in its first report of 1960. There was a rioting in 1959. There was a mass killings. There was indiscriminate killings, destruction of monasteries starting from 1959, and Legal Inquiry Committee headed by Purushottam Tirkamdas, the chairman, and in his report, he found that acts of genocide has been committed in Tibet with an attempt to destroy Tibet or Tibetan as a religious group. So he pointed out 4 facts in relation to genocide. The fact number 1, that Chinese will not permit adherents or practice of Buddhism in Tibet. They have systematically set out to eradicate this religious belief in Tibet, that they have put in the designs that they have killed the religious figures because the religious belief and practice was an encouragement and example to others. And they have forcibly transferred large number of Tibetan children to materialistic Chinese environment in order to prevent them from having a religious upbringing. So by these methods, by these acts, the Legal Inquiry Committee of on Tibet found that genocide has been committed against Tibet or against this religious group of Tibet. Or Tibet as a nation, or Buddhist religion of Tibet. So the acts of wanton killings of Tibetans and all of the acts that is capable of leading to an extinction of Tibetan as a national or religious group. Basically, the evidence points to a large-scale design to eradicate this separate national, cultural, and religious life of the people. So what defines a Tibetan people? How do we define a Tibetan people or a nation? Our identity is our traditions, language, culture, and religious life that's imbibed closely with our culture that defines us as a Tibetan distinct people. So we have our own language, and language that is we have developed it from the 7th century. It was brought from India, and of course Buddhism was also brought from India from 7th century. So we have the Buddhist monasteries were developed in Tibet on the basis of Indian, as on the basis of, which is based on model of Indian Buddhist monasteries, and it taught philosophies, logics, and many things like history, medicines, rituals, grammar, etc. So yeah, and then there's another system of reincarnation of lamas, and we have so this system was developed in Tibet in 1110. That was the first time a reincarnation of Karmapa was recognized, or a reincarnation of a soul. So today we have 14th Dalai Lama, and Tibetan Buddhist civilization actually reached its peak or apex during the region of 5th Dalai Lama. And at that time, the whole of Tibet was unified under his leadership, and the government was formed. And so from 1642, from the 5th Dalai Lama, since he assumed political power, till 1959, when his 14th Dalai Lama was forced to flee Tibet. We have a Dalai Lama institution as a legitimate government for the people, and it has never lost its legitimacy. Of course, then we came to India, and we formed the Tibetan government-in-exile, and we have today Central Tibetan Administration in exile with the democratic form of government. We have legislature, we have parliament, we have judiciary, and we have executive Kashak with the directly elected president. So that is the brief chronology. And what happened in Tibet since 1959? Tibet has been crying for justice since 1959. Post-conflict of 1959, China imposed more repressive policies, and a sporadic period of mass protests or crackdowns have punctuated, and there's a repression of human rights in Tibet ever since. And well, because of the ICHRRF's International Commission Jury's report, United Nations General Assembly was able to pass the resolution only in 1959. And it called on China to respect fundamental human rights of people and to respect the distinctive cultural and religious life of the people, life of the Tibetan people. And of course, then another resolution was passed in 1961, and it called on Tibetan. It called on China to stop the practices which deprive Tibetan people of their fundamental rights and freedom, including the right to self-determination. The right to self-determination is guaranteed under international law, and Tibetan people wanted to exercise their right of self-determination from 1959 onwards till about 1970s or 80s. We Tibetans wanted to get back our country. We appealed for the world to recognize Tibet as an independent country, and we were fighting for the freedom of our Tibet. Well, of course, in meantime, because of the lack of political will of the other nations, or because of the changing situations, and because the Tibetans in Tibet are suffering, and we are at the verge of extinction because of the repressive policies, we have to change our policies. And of course, we are peace-loving nation, peace-loving people, and so we changed our policy. But it's from, I think, beginning 1980s. So we adopted the middle way policy, which asked only for genuine autonomy in Tibet. Yes. So what was I saying? Yeah. So yes, the third ICG report published in 1997 documents escalation of repression in Tibet, characterized by re-education campaigns in monasteries, arrest of leading religious figures, and ban on public display of photos of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So there is a systematic and coordinated plan of actions. Various Buddhist institutions has been destroyed. Just a few days back, a news popped up and said that there was a destruction or closure of a monastery in Kansu provinces. And well, there is an extrajudicial executions, sterilization, forced abortions, infanticides, massive population transfer of Chinese to Tibet, and thereby Chinese try to destroy the very identity of the Tibetans by policy of large-scale influx of Chinese citizens in Tibet. So this was the problem. This is a problem of Tibet since 1959, and it is an ongoing problem. And because of this cultural genocide, or because of the repressive policies of China, well, human rights tragedy in Tibet is evidenced by waves of self-immolation in Tibet. From 2009 onwards, 154 Tibetans have self-immolated, calling for the freedom for Tibet and return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So what is a cultural genocide, and whether cultural genocide is punishable under the Genocide Convention? There is a limitation of definition of genocide in international law. As of today, there exists no agreement as to what constitutes cultural genocide. There's a lack of precedence. Of course, there's a mention of cultural genocide in few cases, but it is still not yet a crime under international law. Of course, it's gaining acceptance in academic jurisprudence. So this is the lacuna which needs to be filled by the legal experts and by the political will of the nations. So Convention on the Crime of Genocide, in its preliminary draft, found a concept of cultural genocide, but in the final draft, it was taken out. Cultural genocide is an attack to eliminate the wider institutions by abolishing groups' language, restriction on traditional practice, restriction on language, persecution of spiritual leaders, attack on cultural figures and intellectuals, and it includes suppression of literary, religious, and cultural activities also. So, cultural genocide in Tibet takes into 4 forms. The first one, language, religion, and forceful removal of Tibetan nomads, and finally, population transfer into a Tibetan plateau. Religion has always been one of the primary targets for state repression under stability maintenance policy. The policy of religious repression includes strict surveillance on Tibetan monastic institutions. There is always a presence of military personnel in and around the institutes. Monasteries are barred from giving traditional teachings and are placed, monks and nuns are placed with patriotic educations. Then there is, of course, administrative measures of management, admission of monks. There's a control on admission of monks. There is a ceiling put on the number of monks. And of course, there's other administrative measures regulating the monasteries. The third ICG report found that repression in Tibet has increased steadily since 1994 Third National Tibet Work Forum, a key conclave at which senior officials identified the influence of exiled Dalai Lama, the leading figure in Tibetan Buddhism, as the root of Tibet's instability and mapped out a new strategy for the region. So the crackdown on the influence of His Holiness Dalai Lama, who is our leader, has begun, yes. The overall attitude of the party's leader to the Tibetan distinct culture and identity is that the very existence of the Tibetan culture is the basis for the Tibet's spinning out of control. So they have made a policy or propaganda to ban the influence and teachings of His Holiness Dalai Lama, because he is a good influence, he's a guide, he's a spiritual guide, a good influence to Tibetan and good influence to all over the world also. He's a face of Tibet. Until now, Tibetan people have kept the struggle non-violent, indifference to the wishes of His Holiness Dalai Lama. So today, China brushed aside the present Dalai Lama, and they were preparing to appoint the next Dalai Lama. So they think that Beijing can handle the Tibetan people. So, but that would instead be opening the door for destabilization of Tibet. Today, China is waiting for the passing away of His Holiness Dalai Lama. They have, in 2007, passed an order number 5 that says all the tukus or all reincarnated lamas, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, should be approved by them, approved by the Communist China. Any expression of faith and loyalty to Dalai Lama, whom these Chinese authorities considered as separatists, and it is banned, and the people who expresses loyalty to Dalai Lama or even keep the photos of His Holiness Dalai Lama in their mobile are checked and are detained and punished. They even go to door to door and check the prayer rooms and altars, whether Tibetans have kept the photos of His Holiness Dalai Lama. You can see here, this is the altars or the prayer room where Tibetans have to keep the photos of Mao Zedong and Zheng and the Chinese leader. Yeah. So Chinese state party is enforcing its policy of equating any expression of loyalty to Dalai Lama as equal to inciting separatism. Yes. So it's very difficult for Tibetans to exercise freedom of religion and belief. In July of 2020, and this a report from Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy based at Dharamsala, a Tibetan musician, Kanto Theden and Tsekey were convicted of inciting state subversion and sharing state secrets for a song praising the Dalai Lama. They were sentenced to 7 and 3 years in prison, respectively. A Tibetan man has been under police surveillance since 2012 when a random street inspection found him in possession of Dalai Lama's photo on his mobile phone. Just like in recent times where Taliban goes door to door in search of, and check if anyone has a, what is that? Bible app in the mobile phone. So this happens in Tibet also. In December of 2019, Chinese authorities in Chamto have detained a father and son for listening to His Holiness Dalai Lama's teachings on their mobile phone and also for speaking to a relative in exile. And in July of 2020, Chinese authorities in Tibetan autonomous areas in Sichuan and Gansu provinces enforced sweeping restriction on visitors for staying overnight in Tibetan monasteries during the days preceding the 85th birthday of celebration of His Holiness Dalai Lama on 6th July. So this happened even this year also. Tibetans were forbidden to celebrate the birthday of His Holiness Dalai Lama. So under the Chinese law, all the religious entities must integrate the Chinese party state's ideological doctrine into their belief system and practice. And the Buddhist practice must be so as to be so conducive to the national unity and their ideology. So religion has always been the primary target of state repression under the guise of stability maintenance policy. Again, there is another ethnic unity law enforced in May 2020, which imposed wide-range duties and obligations on religious groups, religious schools, and place of religious activity to follow the party's religious policies and to integrate the ideological doctrine of Chinese state system or party state into their belief system. So under the guise of law, under the rubrics of law, the Tibetan culture has been suppressed. So as a result, anything to do with religion in Tibet today, anything to do has to be authorized by the Commission of Nationalities and Religious Affairs, be it be it a number of monks in monastery or conduct of religious festivals, privilege, anything. It has to be authorized by the religious affairs. So this has led to the systematic policies has led to the execution and destruction of religious institutions, and there's an expulsion of monks and nuns, imprisonment or banning religious ceremonies, etc. So this severe control on religion has led to the collapse of Tibetan Buddhist civilization in Tibet. So the first one is an attack on Buddhism, and then second one is attack on the Tibetan language. So in Tibet today, many Tibetans cannot speak their own language, even if both their parents are Tibetan. language is made useless in our own country. And even the Tibetan officials in the in the office, they cannot speak proper Tibetan. 2/3 of the words they use are Chinese. There is a alteration of syntax and the grammar of Tibetan language, and China adopted a new education policy where they have started using new nomenclature, phrases, and new words. Tibet under Communist China, 50 years, published by Department of Information and International Relations in 2001. It carries a long note of anguish by late Khenpo Jigme Phuntsho, the founder and abbot of Larungar Buddhist Institute in Sera in Eastern Tibet. He wrote, I quote, "Actually, the Tibetan language has no value in present-day Tibet. For instance, if a letter were mailed with an address written in Tibetan, it would not reach its destination, even within the Tibet, let alone outside Tibet. In case of travels, no matter how literate a person is in Tibetan, he wouldn't be able to know the bus timings or read the seat number on his ticket. Even if one has to look for a hospital or a shop in a country headquarters or city, the knowledge of Tibetan is useless. A person who knows only Tibetan will find it difficult even to buy a daily necessities." So this is the situation in Tibet. So if this situation remains like this, a Tibetan language will become extinct one day. And there is a very slight opportunity for learning Tibetans in Tibetan school. So in cities and country headquarters, there is a serious case of people being unable to speak Tibetan language, and many of them have lost their Tibetan characteristics. Yes. So a report by Human Rights in China titled "Minority Exclusion, Marginalization and Rising Tension" says Tibetan children are subject to an educational system systematically designed to deny them the opportunity and ability to learn their own histories and language, and to indoctrinate children and instill a sense of inferiority regarding Tibetan culture, religion, and language related to a Chinese culture. So just imagine if a Tibetan has to feel inferior because of being a Tibetan, or because of belonging to a religious group that is a Tibetan Buddhist. So I give you an example. My husband came from Tibet. He came from Tibet, and well, of course, he can speak Tibetan, but for the first time when he reached India and when he went to Tibetan school, did he learn the Tibetan alphabet for the first time. And in Tibet, he never learned Tibetan history. In fact, he thought he was angry when in some game that he watched in Tibet, China lost to Japan, so he was angry at Japan, and that was indoctrinated in Tibetan children, and that was that the Tibet means China. Tibet, I mean, they have not learned about the identity and culture of Tibetan or the history. So this is the education system in Tibet, and this lack of real education is confirmed by the fact that large number of young Tibetans risking their lives, they continue to come to India. They smuggle themselves by paying a large amount of money, and they come to India to receive an education. So yeah, this is the fact. So this genocide, it is a destruction of a group, and it leans on the execution of law and bureaucracy, so that way it differs from mass killings. So it is targeting a population not because of individual themselves, but because they are members of that group. Yeah, but genocide is a crime under Genocide Convention, and it is but cultural genocide is still not a crime, and it cannot be indicted under international criminal, under jurisdiction of International Criminal Court. And therefore, there is a need to identify and, identify and find out and identify and form a laws to counter the attack and destruction of the elements of nationhood or peoplehood, or destruction of the group as a whole. Yeah. So, and the third thing that that shows the cultural genocide in Tibet is due to the population transfer of Chinese into Tibet. Yes, the party's intention in Tibet is also revealed in the forced reallocation of millions of nomads into into an urban place. Yes, the transformation of Tibetan towns into Chinatowns, and this encouragement of mass tourism from mainland to Tibet, with the hope that Chinese tourists will settle in Tibet. So the Chinese government actions in Tibet go further with the forceful removal of 2.5 million Tibetan nomads from traditional pastoral areas. So thereby, this is a destruction of traditional way of life of the Tibetans. They have lived. These 2.5 million people nomads have lived in the Tibetan plateau for ages, for many decades, using their skills, using their traditional knowledge of herding a livestock, and they've sustained there while adapting to the realities of Tibetan fragile economic system. So they have to abandon their traditional way of life, and forcefully, without their consent. And further, the Chinese influx of Chinese population into Tibet have assimilated the Tibetan into a Chinese characteristics or Chinese demography. So if I refer to a think tank or the Chinese commentator, Chinese academic says that the policy on the Tibetan ethnic minority is too lenient, and therefore because it's too lenient, that because of which there was a mass violence or mass peaceful protests erupted in Tibet, and of course violence broke out in Xinjiang in 2009. So they say that it is because of the too lenient policy of China. So in aftermath of these events, Chinese academics consider that this Chinese minority lenient policy has formed the basis. It may form the basis of dismemberment of a country like that of a former Soviet or Yugoslavia. So another academics like Ma Rong of Peking University says that it recommends that a second generation of ethnic policies that would encourage China's minorities to integrate more fully with the Han Chinese majority through intermarriage, social interaction, and the use of Chinese language. So these scholars, Chinese scholars, call for the removal of Tibetan, ethnic identity for each of the minorities, and have their fusion with the majority Han Chinese population. So this is written on this is in written form. This is the way the Chinese form the policies in order to integrate the social, cultural, and the life of Tibetan or life of the minorities with that of the Chinese. So merge with Chinese, and they have they have implemented this plan by encouraging mass population transfer and to assimilate Tibetans, and by mass domestic tourism. each day there is 6 trains coming from China to Tibet. So yes, let me quote another think tanks. Chinese solidarity with the Tibetan people in Gongmang, the Open Constitution Initiative, an NGO based in Beijing, in its report of 2009, it says the Beijing's hardline policy is the reason for the peaceful protests in 2008. So because of the hardline policies adopted by the Chinese, repressive policies, Tibetan people revolt against China. They are unable to live under the repressive policies. And so the impact of population transfer today is an period of emergency for Tibetans. The large influx of Chinese is a blow for the, it's a blow for the erosion of Tibetan culture values, and this cultural invasion is reflected in the changing habits of Tibetan people. Now Tibetan people are unable to speak Tibetan language. There's a decrease in use of Tibetan language, and even the landscape, it's all transformed. It looks like Chinatown. Yes. So these changes force the Tibetan to adjust to a cultural influence of new cultural influence, and that is the majority Han Chinese, and this is at the cost of Tibetan identity and culture. So the combined impact of systematic destruction of Tibetan religion, destruction of Tibetan education, language, removal of nomads, and the population transfer, these 4 completes the concept of annihilation of Tibetan culture and way of life. In other words, a culture genocide. So today the Tibetan may be physically intact, but the collective identity of Tibetan as a Tibetan, it suffers fundamentally. So the Lamkin's, the original conception of genocide, which expressed and which recognized that a group could be destroyed by attacking any of these unique aspects, as well as original ad hoc committee on genocide, which defines genocide as any deliberate attempt or any deliberate act committed with the intent to destroy language, religion, culture of a national or religious groups on the grounds of national, racial origin, or religious belief of its member. This definition, this act and this intent applies in case of Tibet and fulfills the definition of culture genocide.
Tsekey, if you can wrap up, then we can take a couple of questions.
Yes, sure. So, but it is still not a crime under International Criminal Court. Of course, genocide, there may be a genocide or culture genocide ancillary to the, ancillary to genocide. That way the crimes could fall under the ICC, otherwise not. So, okay, I'll wrap up here. And yes, so Tibet today cries for help from international communities, state actors, and UNO to help Tibet, protect Tibet from its cultural destruction, from its extinction of culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tsekey. As I said, people who have questions, please put it in the chat. A couple of them have sent it to me personally as well. So I'll start with the first one. I guess several of us are a little surprised that there are no international laws to punish cultural genocide, including taking children away from their parents and culturating them differently. Is there any kind of a move change this? I mean, we see things even in respect to China. We see the Uyghur issue in the media a lot, where they're taken to internment camps away from their families. So, is there any kind of a move to institute laws internationally to punish cultural genocide?
Well, taking away children from a group and putting in a new environment, that is included in the concept of genocide. And as for destruction of culture, for example, destruction of cultural heritage or monuments or symbolic of culture, the physical destruction of the tangible things are prohibited by Hague Conventions and falls under crimes. Of course, it is under humanitarian law. Yes, of course, it is crime and it is punishable, but not for the intangible cultural values like Buddhist practices, teachings, or values, or some innate things like so. But yes, it is gaining recognition or acceptance in international law. But it has to depend mostly. But there is no concrete law as such, and if and when there is a case before if and when there is a case, yes, of course, there must be a wide scale or something as as heinous crime as genocide. And if cultural genocide is it is done along with the genocide, physical destruction or physical killing of a person, and I think there would be a mention or indictment if and when such case comes up, because now it is gaining recognition. Now there is a consensus among all academics, and it's gaining acceptance in legal jurisprudence. And of course, there is a mention of cultural genocide in a case. Where I have some case, but the person was not punished for genocide. That case is Al-Meta or something. Yeah, I forgot. So he was indicted for destruction to cultural heritage as a but not for cultural genocide. Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that even some Chinese academics were saying that the treatment of the Tibet issue could possibly become a cause for the disintegration of the PRC. There's a related question from Firdaus here. I would like to know, what is the geopolitical trigger that could make China shift towards a more pro-Tibet self-determination path?
I didn't get it. Can you please explain further?
What situation internationally or within China could trigger China to reconsider its treatment of Tibet and give them more self-determination, stop this program of cultural genocide? Is there something that could change China's mind?
Oh, it's very, very difficult. Very difficult. See, unless international actors like big nations not just pass recommendations of resolutions, but act by passing legislation in their domestic legislation, and hold the perpetrators personally liable, and not only that, well, other than that, the use of force, it's difficult. Use of force, we do not expect that also, unless China triggers on its own, and unless that there is a big revolt within Tibet. Because like 2008, there is a big, mass protests, and there's a national, the protest spread all over Tibet because of the repression of human rights, as well as and also to boycott Olympics. So likewise, the upcoming Olympics, there's bound to be a another kind of protests or revolution. Well, I do not hope for that, of course, because it's not good for peace or not good for our own people. But with the pressure from United Nations, or United Nations, it's difficult, of course, but I wish, or I hope, India, USA come together and do some concrete acts or pass legislations that would force the China to to be more lenient to Tibetans.
Okay. On that note, I'll just end with one more question. In fact, you just mentioned you were hoping that India and the USA. There are a host of countries, especially in East Asia, starting with powerful countries like Japan, which have a Buddhist tradition. Why is it that there isn't a broad-based platform to put pressure on China to stop this repression of Tibetan Buddhist culture?
Yes, of course. This is what we expected in 1950s, that we wanted to request and seek help from these Buddhist nations when there was an invasion of Tibet by China in beginning 1950, because at that time we were at the urge, or we are at the urgency to restore our freedom and territorial integrity also. But the Buddhist, even the nations, have to have a power, or should have an influence on the China, economic influence, or they should be able to exercise influence, be it force or whatever. So if it's a weak nations, it doesn't help. Of course, it would be like moral support. It would be like moral support only.
Got it. Thank you very much, Namgyal Tsekey. I know there's a lot to talk about, and I'm sure we'll have you on again to zoom in on other issues relating to Tibet. I wanted to say this session has been recorded. We will be putting it on our YouTube channel, and you can find it on our website, ICHRRF.org. I thank all the participants who joined today and spent an hour of their Saturday morning with us. If you would like to reach out to us, either to work with us, collaborate with us in any way possible, just go to our website and you can write to us and we will be in touch with you. Thank you very much once again, Tsekey Namgyal, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.